Hey readers, it's Mr. Marshall at Stony Lane. So you are starting a unit in a reading workshop on biography, and so I thought let's read some biography together. Okay. Um, so I know in the past you have thought a lot about what to think about inside of books, and this is something I know you've done before, called the work of readers. Like, what do you think about in the beginning of the book, in the middle of the book, and the end of the book, right? and um, and so we're going to do that, but it's a little different with biography. There's other stuff that you think about in biographies that you may not think about in other books. So today what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time reading part of a biography and thinking about what readers think about in the beginning of their biography. Okay, ready? All right, so the first thing, there's three things that we think about in the beginning of a biography. The first is, who is the subject of the biography? The subject is the person that the biography is written about. Who is the subject and what do I already know? So that's the first thing we think about, is who is the subject? What do I already know about the subject? Okay, so we're going to read a biography about a person called Sojourner Truth. And so the subject of this biography is Sojourner Truth. But what we want to think about is, what do I already know about Sojourner Truth? And I know a little bit about her. I don't know a whole lot. I couldn't write a book about her, but I know that she was someone who helped slaves in the 19th century, right before slavery was abolished. She was one of those people that helped slaves, but I don't know how she helped slaves. So I'm wondering what I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn about how she might have helped slaves. Another thing that we want to think about is the setting of the biography. And how does that affect the subject's life? So I know that the setting of the biography of this person's life is right before the Civil War. And so I know that slavery was really bad then. It was really bad, and Sojourner Truth was African American, and so I know that she had to deal a lot with that. So I'm going to be thinking about how slavery was a part of her life. Okay, and then we'll think together, and then we'll add to our chart too. Okay, so this is called A Picture Book of Sojourner Truth, and let's get started. So it says Sojourner Truth was born in 1797 in Hurley, New York. She was the daughter of slaves Betsy and James Hardenberg. Betsy and James's master was Colonel Johannes Hardenberg, from whom Sojourner's parents took their family name. Sojourner's father was also called Baumfree, a low Dutch word for tree, because he seemed as mighty as one. Sojourner grew to look like him, tall, straight, and strong. Okay, so we know Sojourner Truth is the subject, and we know a little bit about her. We know a little bit about the setting. The third thing that we think about in the beginning of a book, in the beginning of a biography, is the person's childhood, and and what their childhood was like, how that affected them. So right now, I know I'm thinking about her childhood and how it affected her. So I gotta think her childhood. I know she had two parents and they were slaves, but let's keep going. When Sojourner was born, her parents named her Isabella and called her Belle. Many years later, when she was a free woman, she renamed herself Sojourner Truth. Okay, so she started her life out as a slave, but then she was free, right? Because she was in New York, right? And so the slaves were freed in the North, right? Let's keep going. Isabella had many brothers and sisters, but most of them had been sold to slave traders and taken away before she was born. Sometimes at night, her mother looked at the sky and sadly told Isabella, "Those are the same stars, and that is the same moon, and that look down upon your brothers and sisters, though they are ever so far away from us and from each other." Wow. So what was her childhood like? Her childhood must have been really sad, because because she knew she had brothers and sisters that she would never ever like know or have a relationship with, right? She knew that her family was kind of like incomplete, right? Because they weren't all together. Hmm. So slavery and the setting, this was really affecting her. That must have been really hard for her, right? Let's keep going. Isabella hated the way slavery tore families apart. Oh Lord, she said many years later, what is this slavery? What is this slavery that it can do such dreadful things? When Isabella was 3, Johannes Hardenberg died. His son Charles was her new owner. Isabella, her parents, and her younger brother Peter lived with other slaves in the cold, wet, one-room cellar of Charles Hardenberg's house. Wow, that's a terrible way to live, right? When Isabella was 9, she was taken from her family and brother and sold to Mr. and Mrs. John Neely, who beat her. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, so she wasn't free when she was a kid. She was still a slave, and she was sold. She was 9 years old. That's like a third grader, a fourth grader is 9 years old, and she was sold away from her family to these people who beat her. Wow, what was her childhood like? Her childhood was especially sad, right? Like, not only did she not have her brothers and sisters, and she knew that, she now lost her parents because she was sold to these people that beat her. That's terrible, right? Isabella's mother had taught her to pray and believe in God. In her prayers, Isabella begged for protection from the Neelys. 2 years later, Isabella was sold to Martin Shriver, a fisherman and an innkeeper. After another year and a half, she was sold to John Dumont. So wow, like she was 9 years old, and then she was sold again in a year, and then she was sold again in another year. So by the time she was 11 or 12, she'd been sold like 3 times. Isabella worked hard for the Dumonts. Her master boasted to his friends that she will do a good family's washing in the night and be ready in the morning to go into the fields, where she will do as much raking and binding as the best hands. So she was a hard worker, but she had a really terrible life, right? We'll read a little bit more. While Isabella worked for the Dumonts, she met Robert, a slave who worked at a nearby farm. She said later that she truly loved him. One day, his master and master's sons caught Robert visiting Isabella. They beat Robert severely with heavy sticks. They tied him up and took him away. And after that, Robert never came back. Wow, that is like so terrible, right? On top of all the terrible things that have happened to her, Sojourner or Isabella, um, she couldn't be with Robert, who she really wanted to be with. She loved him, right? So, wow, those are some of the things that we're thinking about in the beginning of our biography, right? And already we're starting to think stuff. We're already starting to think that Isabella had a whole bunch of tragedies because of slavery, right? Because of slavery, she kind of like she had all these terrible things happen to her. So let's list some of the things that happened to her, right? Let's list some of the things that happened to her. So the first thing is, right, remember, she couldn't be with her brothers and sisters. Oops, sorry. She couldn't be with her brothers and sisters. What else happened? She was sold, and she couldn't be with her parents and Peter, right? And then she couldn't be with Robert, who she loved. She couldn't be with Robert, who she loved, and she wanted to spend time with him, and she couldn't be with him either, right? So I'm going to try and think of like a pattern here, right? Do you see this pattern? I think I see a pattern. She was kept away from her brothers and sisters. She was kept away from her parents and her brother, Peter. She was kept away from Robert, who she really loved, and she couldn't be with him. So it's sort of like I'm getting an idea that I'm getting like a theory going on that slavery kept Sojourner Truth, or we're going to call her Isabella here because that was her name, Isabella, away from people she loved. I'm going to put that idea in a box here. Slavery kept Isabella away from people she loved. Do you see how I did that? How I thought about all these different facts from the beginning of the book? And I looked for a pattern in them and I came up with a theory. Okay, so now as I read on, I'm going to be thinking about that theory. That's going to be the idea that I'm thinking about inside of my book, right? I'm not just going to keep reading and be like, what happened next? What happened next? What happened next? I'm going to be thinking about that. I'm going to be thinking about how slavery kept Isabella away from the people she loved. Okay? So now I'm kind of getting to the middle of my book. And so in the middle of my book, I want to think about certain other things. What hardships did my subject have? What hardships did my subject have? Right? And when people have hardships, those hardships affect them, right? So these hardships that Sojourner Truth is having are going to affect her, right? So I want to think about that. And another thing I want to think about is, what are the relationships like in my book? So she's going to be with other people, and how are those relationships growing? Okay, let's keep going. Are you ready? Here we go. All right. Isabella later agreed to marry Thomas, a slave who worked for Dumont. It was a marriage encouraged by Dumont to increase the number of his slaves. Isabella and Thomas had 5 children together: Diana, Elizabeth, Hannah, Peter, and Sophia. In 1817, a New York state law was passed that would grant freedom to Isabella and other slaves in 10 years on July 4th, 1827. Dumont promised to free Isabella in 9 years on July 4th, 1826, if she continued to work hard for him. She worked in the fields planting, plowing, and harvesting, but when the time came for her release, John Dumont refused. Whoa! That's terrible. So here we are, right? Slavery is keeping her away from all these other people that she loves. She's got a new family there, but they're still slaves, right? And so what hardships did she have? Where is that? What hardships did she have? Again, like, she didn't have her freedom, right? Like any slaves did. And she was having relationships. Like, she had a husband now, and she had 5 children who she really loved. But she had this terrible master who went back on his word. He lied to her, right? Let's keep going. Let's keep thinking about this and about the hardships. Let's read a little bit more. Isabella was furious. She decided to run away. But first, she finished her work. She spun about 100 pounds of her master's wool. Then, early in the morning, she took her infant daughter, Sophia, and left to find Levi Rowe, a farmer and a Quaker who hated slavery. Isabella told him her story, and he sent her to Isaac and Maria Van Wagener. Dumont found Isabella at the Van Wageners and demanded that she come back. I won't, she said. Then the Van Wageners then paid Dumont for Isabella and Sophia's freedom. Whoa! There's a great relationship. These Van Wagener people, right? They saved her, right? They saved her. They hid her, and then they wouldn't give her back, right? And so I'm thinking that there were people that helped, right? I'm going to write these names down because I feel like that's important. So the Rose, right? Levi Rowe, right? And the Van Wageners. They helped, right? So their relationship was important. It was important for Isabella to know that these people were going to help her, right? So important, so important. So I have a lot of good thinking going on, and so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to put this away, And then, like, next time that I start reading this book, I'm going to start by thinking about these ideas. I'm going to start by thinking about how slavery kept Isabella away from people she loved. And I'm going to think about how these people helped her. And I'm going to think maybe there are other people that are helping, and those relationships are going to be important. Okay, I'll see you next time.